Welcome to the Golden Gems podcast. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Daniel Rigmaiden, the elusive tax fraud hacker, who inadvertently exposed the FBI's secret Stingray surveillance program from his solitary confinement cell. You are joining us for a rigorous, analytical exploration of an incredible and, frankly, deeply unsettling true story. We are examining a piece of meticulous cultural criticism by Abel Arroyo, a biographer who focuses on the forensic breakdown of legacy and the human cost of our digital transition. Our mission today is to unpack a profound paradox. We need to understand how a high-level identity thief became the most effective champion of the modern privacy movement.
And we also have to understand the sheer scale of the constitutional crisis his eventual arrest triggered, because this isn't just a true crime story.
Right. We are not here for surface-level gossip. This deep dive is about state power, systemic secrecy, and a technological dragnet that operated entirely in the shadows.
It is a narrative that demands absolute precision to fully comprehend. To understand the magnitude of Daniel Rigmaiden's discovery, you first have to grasp the extreme architecture of the isolation he built for himself. Long before he was a federal defendant, he was effectively a phantom.
Born in Monterey, California, yeah. And Arroyo's text does something brilliant here. It digs into Rigmaiden's genealogical foundations to explain this.
Yes, the Reconstruction ancestry. Arroyo traces his family history back to the post-Reconstruction era, which is critical. That history instilled a deeply rooted generational wariness of state power and official record-keeping.
Which means his refusal to participate in the standard societal grid wasn't just some sudden erratic paranoia, it was historically grounded. He made a conscious decision early in his adulthood that the grid was a trap.
Exactly. For years, he lived completely off-grid in the woods, literally sleeping in tents. Yet while he was moving entirely through the analog world, he was simultaneously constructing a highly sophisticated digital empire of fraud.
Which requires a very specific kind of mindset. He wasn't some chaotic grifter throwing things at the wall to see what stuck. Rigmaiden was a disciplined systems architect. He looked at the United States tax code and saw it for what it essentially was, a buggy software program, simply ripe for exploitation.
His scheme was brutal, but structurally elegant. He acquired the names and social security numbers of deceased individuals because dead people obviously cannot object or flag a fraudulent return to the credit bureaus.
Precisely. Using those identities, he filed fraudulent tax returns, claiming refunds that the Internal Revenue Service simply automatically processed.
The IRS at the time was overwhelmed, under-verified, and completely reliant on automated systems. Rigmaiden knew exactly how to slip through those algorithmic cracks, but the crucial part of his operation was the financial routing.
The money never went directly to him.
Never. He funneled it through a deeply complex web of bank accounts and debit cards, heavily insulated under layers of encryption and false identities. To the authorities tracking the missing funds, he was simply known as the hacker, a faceless entity silently siphoning millions straight from the Treasury.
By 2008, his lifestyle shifted, but his intense operational security remained completely intact. He moved out of the woods and into a luxury apartment complex in Santa Clara, California. He assumed the alias Steven Travis Brawner.
And this apartment wasn't a cozy home. It was a sterile operational bunker. He possessed fake identification documents crafted with such high quality that they could pass stringent federal scrutiny.
He also understood that banks leave digital trails, so he stored his wealth exclusively in physical commodities. When authorities eventually breached his sanctuary, the inventory was staggering. $117,000 in cash, 230 ounces of gold, and 588 ounces of silver.
He paid rent with money orders, maintained zero social media footprint, had no credit history, and owned no registered vehicle.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if he is living this ghost-like existence, dealing entirely in physical gold and money orders, he obviously has to touch the digital world at some point to execute a hack of this magnitude.
Right.
How is he connecting to the IRS without immediately blowing his cover?
His entire operation, his single tether to the outside world, was a Verizon AirCard. It was a small USB-connected modem that provided wireless internet access to his laptop.
And that little device was his portal to the IRS servers.
Yes, and crucially, it was his only vulnerability. Rigmaiden was meticulous, but he genuinely believed he was completely safe because he understood the technical limits of cellular technology at the time.
So he was relying on the math of the cellular network itself to hide him.
That is the core of his defense shield. He calculated that standard cellular triangulation, which is the typical method law enforcement used to locate a mobile device, was simply too imprecise.
It might place a device within a general neighborhood or a city block.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it mathematically could not pinpoint a specific room inside a densely populated apartment complex. He relied entirely on this technical limitation. As far as he was concerned, he was mathematically untraceable.
Which means his entire reality was built on an assumption that shattered in a matter of seconds. On August 3rd, 2008, his invisible world collapsed. He was leaving his Santa Clara apartment when he spotted a vehicle that simply did not belong in his meticulously observed environment.
His instincts screamed danger. He immediately fled.
What followed was a chaotic, physical chase through the complex, ending with Rigmaiden slammed into handcuffs. His empire of hoarded gold was seized, and his anonymity was erased in an afternoon. But the truly defining moment of the story isn't the physical takedown.
It's the immediate aftermath.
Yes.
Yeah.
Picture him sitting in a holding cell. The adrenaline is fading. He's facing the absolute ruin of his life. Instead of descending into panic, his mind does something extraordinary. It pivots straight to the physics of radio frequency propagation.
He sits there, analyzing the geography of his capture. And a singular question begins to gnaw at him. How did they know exactly where he was?
Right, because according to his math, they shouldn't have been able to find that specific apartment.
What's fascinating here is the government's official explanation, and why it instantly fell apart under Rigmaiden's scrutiny. The narrative the authorities presented was a standard, boilerplate police procedural. They claimed they had utilized historical cell site data provided by Verizon to track his AirCard.
For almost any other defendant or, frankly, standard defense attorneys, this explanation would have been completely sufficient. Criminals use technology, technology tracks criminals, case closed.
But Rigmaiden isn't a standard defendant. He is a technician who staked his freedom on the highly specific limitations of those exact cellular networks. The Verizon data claim sounded completely absurd to him.
It was a physical impossibility.
And he knew it immediately. First, the specific Verizon AirCard he used did not possess a GPS chip. It could not broadcast its own precise geographical coordinates. Second, he had mapped the exact topography of the cell towers in Santa Clara.
They were far too sparse to allow for the kind of precision triangulation required to identify his specific apartment unit among hundreds of others.
If the government had relied solely on the historical data provided by Verizon, they would have been looking for a needle in a massive haystack. They would have been forced to knock on hundreds of doors in that complex.
But they didn't knock on any doors. They bypassed the haystack entirely and went straight to the needle.
Which led Rigmaiden to a singular, inescapable conclusion. A third party had intervened in the signal between the legitimate cell tower and his laptop. Sitting in that cell, he didn't yet know what this technology was, but he knew with absolute certainty that the government was lying about it.
That realization sparked a relentless obsession that would consume the next 6 years of his life. And the stakes of that obsession could not have been higher. Rigmaiden was indicted on a staggering list of charges. 35 counts of wire fraud, 35 counts of aggravated identity theft, plus conspiracy and mail fraud.
He was effectively facing life in federal prison.
Most defendants staring down the infinite resources of the Department of Justice would have folded and taken a plea deal. Rigmaiden fired his public defenders. He requested permission to represent himself, proceeding pro se, and turned his solitary cell into a legal war room.
Because he was representing himself, he gained direct access to the discovery file. For those unfamiliar, discovery is the massive data dump of every scrap of evidence the government intends to use against you.
For Rigmaiden, this meant thousands upon thousands of pages of raw documents, police reports, unpolished technical data dumps, warrant applications, and internal emails.
He used the jail's law library to read every single word. He built an intricate mental index, meticulously cross-referencing timestamps from the physical raid with the granular technical specifications of the network data.
And he found the glitch hidden in the bureaucratic gaps. As he analyzed the FBI's warrant applications, he noticed a pattern of incredibly vague, passive language. The FBI never named a specific tracking device. Instead, they hid behind phrases like electronic surveillance techniques.
Or they relied on information from a mysterious confidential source.
Ah, yes. The highly reliable confidential source known as a giant illegal radio antenna.
The linguistic gymnastics were glaring, but the raw data was even more damning. Rigmaiden found logs showing that his AirCard had been forced to disconnect from the legitimate Verizon tower and inexplicably reconnect to a much stronger, highly localized signal.
He also discovered charts detailing signal strength that didn't look like a standard network map. They looked like a literal game of hot and cold, tracking a signal as it moved closer to a specific physical location.
Armed with these anomalies, he started filing laser-guided legal demands. He aggressively requested the technical specifications of the equipment used to track him, the user manuals, and the operational training logs of the agents involved.
Which must have completely baffled the federal prosecutors. They're used to arguing over legal intent or jurisdictional boundaries, not debating the granular physics of radio frequency propagation with a pro se defendant writing on yellow legal pads.
Predictably, they stonewalled him. They cited law enforcement privilege and invoked the impenetrable shield of national security. But Rigmaiden bypassed them. He started writing letters to the FCC, to Verizon, to anyone who might hold a fragment of the puzzle.
Through sheer deduction, he realized the device used against him was acting as a rogue, fake cell tower, actively tricking his AirCard into broadcasting its location to a portable receiver.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In a massive pile of heavily redacted documents, his relentless reading finally pays off. He spots a single, solitary word that the government censors accidentally missed. One unredacted mention of a brand name. Stingray.
That was the thread, and he pulled it with everything he had. The discovery of that name unlocked the entire technical reality of the operation. He uncovered that the Stingray was manufactured by the Harris Corporation, a highly secretive defense contractor.
And he learned exactly what the machine was.
Yes, an IMSI-catcher, which stands for International Mobile Subscriber Identity Catcher. Think of your cell phone as a loyal dog constantly looking for its master. It is always scanning for the strongest, closest cell tower to connect to.
The Stingray walks into a neighborhood, puts on a mask, and shouts through a massive megaphone, "I am the best, closest cell tower."
Exactly. Every single phone in the area instantly abandons its real network and connects directly to the FBI's machine. Once a device is tricked into connecting, the Stingray operator can determine the exact direction and distance of the target with devastating pinpoint accuracy.
But the Stingray doesn't operate with a scalpel. It operates with a sledgehammer. It didn't just catch Rigmaiden's target device. It caught everyone. Think about what this means for you. If you were sitting in your apartment next door to Rigmaiden, your phone, your private data, your exact location was swept up in this FBI dragnet, and you never even knew it happened.
They were effectively searching the private homes of hundreds of oblivious citizens without a warrant, all to locate one tax fraudster.
Rigmaiden realized instantly that he hadn't just uncovered a lie. He had uncovered a massive constitutional crisis.
It is a direct assault on the foundation of the Fourth Amendment, which protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. A lawful search warrant requires particularity. It must explicitly describe the specific place to be searched and the specific items to be seized.
The Stingray, by its fundamental operational design, functions as an unconstitutional general warrant. It indiscriminately searches everyone in an area just to find one specific person.
And the government was deliberately keeping this invasive capability entirely hidden from the judges signing the initial authorizations.
Knowing the magnitude of this, Rigmaiden reached out from his cell to the heavyweights, the American Civil Liberties Union and the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He mailed them hundreds of pages of his dense, handwritten forensic analysis.
Christopher Sokoyan, the principal technologist at the ACLU at the time, was absolutely stunned. Privacy advocates suspected devices like the Stingray existed, but they had never seen concrete proof of their deployment in standard domestic criminal cases.
Rigmaiden literally handed them the smoking gun. Together, this prisoner in solitary and these elite privacy advocates launched a coordinated assault. Rigmaiden battered the court with motions from the inside, while the ACLU filed aggressive Freedom of Information Act requests in Washington.
The government's retaliation was ferocious. They argued in court that revealing any details about the Stingray technology would provide criminals with a roadmap to evade capture.
They even attempted to argue that the Harris Corporation's proprietary commercial interest in protecting its trade secrets legally trumped a criminal defendant's constitutional right to a fair trial.
But the deeper Rigmaiden and the ACLU dug, the more toxic the government's position appeared. They uncovered draconian non-disclosure agreements that the FBI had systematically forced local police departments across the country to sign.
These agreements contained an unbelievable directive. They explicitly instructed local authorities that if a prosecutor was ever at risk of being forced by a judge to reveal the use of a stingray in open court, they were required to drop the criminal charges entirely.
The government was structurally mandating that police let criminals walk free, simply to protect the commercial secret of the stingray.
So what does this all mean? We have to acknowledge the devastating physical and psychological toll this took on Rigmaiden. He wasn't some comfortably tenured professor fighting a theoretical cause from a faculty lounge. He was a desperate prisoner fighting for his actual life.
He spent 68 months, over 5 brutal years, in pretrial detention. The vast majority of that time was spent in solitary confinement or segregated housing. That is a punitive condition routinely imposed on difficult prisoners who file too many legal grievances.
Rigmaiden was working 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, writing on those yellow legal pads. He suffered severe eye strain, chronic back pain, and lived in a constant suffocating state of hypervigilance. He knew vindictive guards could label his legal papers as contraband and seize them at any moment.
He was David fighting Goliath, but Goliath held the physical keys to his cage. Which brings us to the profound moral paradox at the very heart of this deep dive.
Daniel Rigmaiden was undeniably a prolific criminal. He had stolen millions of dollars and callously exploited the identities of the dead for his own financial gain.
And yet, when placed within the vast architecture of the United States surveillance state, he somehow emerged as the only honest man in the room.
The justice system relies on a principle called the duty of candor, an obligation to be truthful with the court. Yet in this case, FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and even complicit judges were engaged in a systemic violation of that duty.
They were continuously, intentionally misleading the courts about the technological methods used to obtain evidence. The identity thief was forced to become the lone, uncompromising guardian of the truth.
His relentless guardianship eventually broke the system. By 2013, the pressure on the Department of Justice became completely untenable. Rigmaiden's legal motions were getting sharper and infinitely more dangerous to the state's secrets.
The ACLU's campaign was generating massive national headlines.
The judge overseeing the case, David Campbell, began to publicly express his deep frustration with the government's constant evasiveness and finally demanded transparent answers. The DOJ was suddenly staring down a nightmare scenario.
If they proceeded to trial, they risked a formal judicial ruling that would declare the warrantless use of stingrays entirely unconstitutional. Such a precedent would instantly cripple federal and local intelligence operations nationwide. They had to make the problem go away.
And they did the only thing they could.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the resolution of this case is historically unprecedented. In April 2014, the Department of Justice approached Rigmaiden with a plea deal that is virtually unheard of for a defendant facing a 70-plus count federal indictment.
They offered him time served.
The government essentially surrendered. Rigmaiden accepted the deal, pleading guilty to only a tiny fraction of the original charges. He was formally sentenced to the 68 months he had already endured in pretrial detention, plus probation.
On the day of his sentencing, he walked out of the federal courthouse in Phoenix, Arizona, a completely free man. The government may have technically saved their conviction on paper, but they absolutely lost the war.
Rigmaiden's meticulous work created a permanent, undeniable public record. The fallout, what cultural critics like Abel Arroyo now call the Rigmaiden effect, rippled violently through the American legal system.
The stingray was dragged out of the shadows and onto the front pages. State legislatures across the country began passing mandatory laws requiring strict warrants for the use of any cell site simulators.
The Harris Corporation's decades-long veil of absolute secrecy was permanently destroyed, and his legacy continues to evolve. In the years following his release, Rigmaiden did not return to the woods, and he did not return to a life of fraud.
He pivoted that incredible, disciplined obsession into legitimate activism.
By March 2026, looking at the landscape of digital privacy, the foundation he laid is everywhere. The air gap that he originally tried to build around his own illicit life in Santa Clara is now widely recognized as the very precursor to the modern privacy movement's emphasis on end-to-end encryption and signal blocking.
He now works as a vital consultant for defense attorneys and privacy advocacy groups. He is explicitly teaching them how to spot the telltale forensic signs of stingray surveillance hidden deep within discovery documents.
He drafts the very legislative frameworks that now restrain police surveillance powers. He conclusively proved that the surveillance state relies entirely on the ignorance of the surveilled, and that a single, uncompromising person can force the massive machinery of government to expose its own gears.
As you digest this deep dive today, I want to leave you with a lingering, deeply unsettling question to mull over. We have just explored the story of a man who was a verified genius of systems architecture. He possessed the extreme discipline required to erase himself almost entirely from both the analog and digital grids.
A discipline forged by a deep genealogical understanding of the dangers of state tracking.
Exactly. And yet, even he could not hide from the digital eye of the state. So if a man like Daniel Rigmaiden couldn't truly disappear, is true privacy even possible for the rest of us? Or are we all merely waiting for the inevitable moment when our own everyday mundane data anomalies trigger the algorithm?
It is a terrifying thought.
Thank you for listening to the Golden Gems podcast. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep celebrating the power of uncompromising voices.